When Yaakov is on the way to Charan, he makes a promise, a neder. He says, if Hashem will be with me, v'hoya Hashem li l'elikim, Hashem will be my God, v'evan hazos asher samti matzeva, the stone that I've placed as a monument, yeh beis elikim, will be a house for Hashem, etc. The Mefarshim asked the question, how is it possible that Yaakov is making a condition to be able to do all of these good deeds? He's making a condition, if Hashem will be with me, and so on. And the Rebbe explains that the condition is not a condition, if Hashem will do this, then I'll do that. It's the other way around. Yaakov Avinu wants to do certain ma'asim tovim, certain good things, that the stone should be a beis elikim, will bring karbonis, he'll give meiser, etc. That's the goal. The condition is saying, how am I going to be able to do this if Hashem is going to provide me with these few things? In order to understand this, says the Rebbe, generally there's two pirushim within our psukim, of which part of the psukim are the condition, which part is the neder. Rashi explains that these words, v'hoya Hashem li l'elikim, Hashem will be my God, this is part of the condition, that Hashem will be my God, Hashem will remain connected with me and my children, and so on and so forth, and that's why it's in the same pasuk as v'shavti b'shalom al beis avi, which is part of the condition. The Ramban, on the other hand, is saying v'hoya Hashem li l'elikim is already part of the neder, part of the promise that he's making. How do we understand all of this? Says the Rebbe, we know that the whole point of Yaakov going down to Charan is what's called Yerida Tzoyrech Aliyah, descent for the purpose of an Aliyah, of an ascent. And the Rebbe explains that there's three details within this Aliyah, or three ideas. Number one, that he's not going to be influenced, affected by Lavan and his surroundings over there. This is similar to the concept of a Baal Tshuva, that tasted the taste of evil, of bad, etc., and he's making sure to not be influenced by it. Number two, it's specifically in Charan, where he's going to fulfill the mitzvah of Pirya Verivya, marrying, having children, and to the extent that he's going to have children that are all tzaddikim, this is a second aliyah that he gains. And number three, according to Chassidus, there's the idea that he deals 20 years with the sheep of Lavan, which is the concept of elevating all the godly sparks that were in all of these sheep, and in this way, causing what we know the concept of dira betachtoinim. The Rebbe says the same thing is true in our avodah. The Ohr HaChaim, in fact, says how Vayeitzei Yaakov, that Yaakov going from Be'er Shava to Charan, is referring to the neshama coming down into the guf. And here too we have this idea of a Yerida Tzoyrech Aliyah, and again these same three ideas. When the neshama was up above, it's on the level of a tzaddik, coming down into the guf, into Nefesh HaBahamis, with the Yetzer Hara blocking and sealing a likus. Nevertheless, it does its avodas Hashem, so it's coming now to the level of being like a Baal Tshuva. There's also the idea, point number two, that down here it's able to fulfill all of Torah and mitzvahs, including this idea of having children. And finally, number three is that by dealing with the Gashmiistic worlds, we make that the world should be a place for Hashem. Says the Rebbe, in this idea of making a dira betachtoinim, there's a certain advantage that the neshama gains when it's involved in what we call the avodah of kol maasecha yi l'shem shamayim b'chol drochecha, you're taking from the regular and mundane things of the world and doing them for Hashem, even more in a certain sense than being involved with inyanim of Torah and mitzvahs, which are direct kedusha. Because when we're dealing with these lowly mundane things, these are the tachtoinim, the very lowly things, and that's the whole idea of making the world a place for Hashem, dira betachtoinim. Now, just to point out that even though we just mentioned three general ideas that happen in the Aliyah, the main focus of our Sikha is really going to be dealing with two of them, the first and the third one. In other words, number one, the idea of the Baal Tshuva aspect, the idea that there's concealments and nevertheless we overcome them. And number three, and that was the second thing that the Rebbe deals with, is the third point that we just mentioned, the idea of dira betachtoinim. And the Rebbe says, just like we just explained, that in the concept of dira betachtoinim, there's a certain advantage when we deal with the lowly, with the mundane, the things that are not even kedusha, the things that are not even doing Torah and mitzvahs with it. In a similar way, in regards to the first point that we spoke about, the mile of a Baal Tshuva, overcoming our Yetzer Hara despite the challenges, despite the concealments, here too there's a certain advantage when we deal with Inyoni Yereshus, with the mundane things, doing them l'shem shamayim, compared to the avodah of Torah and mitzvahs. That is, in Torah and mitzvahs, although we need to overcome our Yetzer Hara to be able to fulfill the mitzvahs, nevertheless, once I overcame my Yetzer Hara, once it was revealed inside of the Yid his inner desire to do a mitzvah, so now the Yetzer Hara has no connection to this mitzvah. In other words, that in the actual avodah of the mitzvah, that's not part of the avodah of what we call the avodah of tshuva. Now the Yetzer Hara is out of the way, and we do the mitzvah. But in the avoid of kol masech l'shem shamayim, in the avoid of dealing with the worldly things and doing them for Hashem's sake, let's take the example of eating, for example. So you're eating because of that taiva or the rotzon of the nefesh habahamis that your body wants to eat. And now within that same thing itself, you're now going to do it in the avodah itself. You're doing it l'shem shamayim. And therefore the avodah of Baal Tshuva aspect is within the avodah itself, not only as a preparation or pushing the Yetzer Hara out of the way. Or to explain a little bit more in detail, the Rebbe says. Generally, what's the idea, the mile of a tshuva over a tzaddik? So we understand that Baal Tshuva, here the connection of a yid's neshama, that strength, that powerful connection of the neshama is revealed that even though a yid did an aveira, he's always bound to Hashem. He can always do tshuva. Similarly, when we speak about the fact that the neshama gains the idea of tshuva by coming down into this world, it continues serving Hashem despite all the challenges, concealments over Torah and mitzvahs. So it's also the idea of tshuva, but it's still in a way that it's only he's overcoming the Yetzer Hara, pushing the Yetzer Hara aside. But when we come to the idea of doing things l'shem shamayim, here that deepest kashrus, like the Baal Tshuva has, that deepest kashrus of the neshama is revealed in a much deeper way, because we're saying that it's felt now even within the desires and the wants of the nefesh habahamis, or to use again the example, within the food I'm eating. Now, the Rebbe says that up until here, we were speaking about the advantage that the neshama has, which is the advantage of tshuva, beautiful, all nice. But again, remember, there was another point we said the neshama is coming down over here, that it's really about making a dira lo yizbarich, a place for Hashem. And this is really much, much greater. Even for the neshama, it's much greater. And the Rebbe explains. The connection that the neshama has with Hashem is ultimately because of its nature, because of its own mitzias. And this is what we say, that its connection is so strong, so powerful, that even as it comes into a nefesh habahamis, it's still connected to Hashem, and even within the nefesh habahamis things. But ultimately, it's still limited to a certain extent, because it's still coming part of the nature. That's what a neshama is all about. But when it comes and makes from the world should be a keli telikos. Now, this is opposite the nature of the world. The world itself is not a keli telikos. And this cannot be coming just from the nature of the neshama. It cannot be poil. It cannot affect that the world itself should become a keli telikos. So how the world is a concealment, is a contradiction telikos. So how does the world become a place for Hashem? That's only because Hashem has no limitations. The achdus of Hashem has no limitations, and therefore even the world could become a dira for Hashem. So when the neshama is involved in this avodah, revealing the bligvul of Hashem in the world, so now its connection to Hashem is also raised to a much higher level, that it's not only based on its own limitation, its own nature, but rather it's coming because of the achdus of Hashem, which is completely bligvul. Says the Rebbe, all of these aliyahs of the neshama, even the aliyah that happens, that making the dira for Hashem, is still not the ultimate purpose. The tachlis is doing the will of Hashem and making the dira b'tachtonim. It's only that because the neshama is involved in fulfilling this kavanah, so it also gains the reward and the benefit of having this tremendous aliyah. Now, how does this fit with what we often say in Chassidus, that you read the tzorech aliyah, that the purpose of the neshama coming down is for the sake of an aliyah? Now we're saying it's not for the sake of the aliyah itself. It's just for the dira b'tachtonim. So the Rebbe explains that it's known in regards to the concept of dira b'tachtonim, it's specifically only in this world where we have atzmos, the very essence of Hashem. In the higher worlds we have what's called giluyim. There's certain great revelations, great energies, great lights. And this is connected with the fact, says the Rebbe, that it's specifically down here in this world that there's a certain bitul, the Rebbe refers to it as the bitul of ein oid. In the concept of yesh me'ayin means there's nothing truly else besides for Hashem. Everything is, the whole time, is only here because Hashem is making it be here. As opposed in the higher olamus, where the bittul is called kula kamei killah chashiv. It's great lights, it's great energies, it's great revelations. It's like nothing compared to Hashem, but it still seems as if it has some sort of mitzias. It's specifically this world, yesh me'ayin cannot exist for 1 second. It's nothing outside of Hashem. So there's this idea of a tremendous bittul that's naturally in this world. Now, since the whole point of dira b'tachtonim is that it should come as a result of the avodah of the person, so therefore, it's also needed that the avodah of the one doing the dira should also be with this absolute bittul. And in other words, says the Rebbe, so now we can understand the two things coming together. When we say you read the tzorech aliyah, what is the aliyah of the neshama? The aliyah of the neshama, as we said, is that bittul that it now comes to, where there's absolutely nothing outside of Hashem. It's not even for its own personal gain of the neshama. It's to make a dira b'tachtonim for the Eibishter. That's the bittul that's needed to make that dira. So these two things are going together. It's specifically in order to make the dira b'tachtonim, you need the bitul of the neshama, because that's what dira b'tachtonim is all about, bringing out the bitul in our world. And again, the aliyah of the neshama is coming to this greatest unity of Hashem, this greatest bitul to Hashem. Now, the Rebbe says, we could now come back to understand the psukim that we started off with. Let's look at the neder of Yaakov. We have two psukim discussing the Tanai, the condition. If Hashem will be with me and He'll protect me, He will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, and then v'shavti b'shalom al beisavi, I'll come home in peace to my father's house. According to the Ramban, we now have two parts within the neder. We'll soon see Rashi. Now, v'hoya Hashem lila lekim is part one of the neder, that Hashem will be my God. V'evan azoysiya beis lekim, and the stone will be a house for Hashem. Now, as we said before, the purpose is the neder, what's going to happen in the end result. The conditions was in order to allow the neder to be fulfilled. So now, within the purpose and the goal, we can now understand that there's two things. There's the aliyah of the neshama itself, the neshama being elevated, and there's the concept of dira b'tachtoinim. The avodah that brings to that is also two things. We have two things. We have the avodah of Torah and mitzvahs generally, and the avodah of kol masachel l'shem shamayim. So now let's see that in our psukim, and how that fits with the Tanai, with the condition. If I'll be able to do Torah and mitzvahs l'shem shamayim, then I will come to these two things of the aliyah haneshama and to dira b'tachtoinim. Says the Rebbe, the pasuk Yiyalikim imodi ushmarani, Hashem will be with me, He'll protect me in matters of sur meira, that I'll stay away from aveiros. Hashem will help me in the same pasuk still. Give me bread to eat, clothes to wear is Torah and mitzvahs. Torah is compared to food, mitzvahs are compared to clothes. So that's all one pasuk. That's all one part of what Yaakov Avinu is saying. The next pasuk says, "V'shavti b'shalom al beisavi," is the idea of the avodah of kol masechel l'shem shamayim. I'm going to be involved with Lavan's things, and yet within all of these gashmiistic things, I'll still all do it l'shem shamayim. Now that's all leading up to what's going to happen, the result. What's going to be the result? Two things. V'hoya Hashem li le'elikim, that's the aliyah of the neshama becoming close to Hashem, one with Hashem. And finally, v'evan azois tiya beis elikim, that's the idea of dira b'tachtoinim. Now that's according to the Ramban, that the aliyah of the neshama is sort of also part of the reward. But Rashi, who's pshutei shel mikra, that means he focuses more on the avodah of a simple servant that's just doing everything for the purpose of the master himself, not looking for any benefits for himself. So according to Rashi, v'hoya Hashem li le'elikim is still part, the aliyah of the neshama is still part of the avodah, or the things that come before the ultimate. Because even the aliyah of the neshama is not the ultimate purpose. The ultimate purpose is only the dira b'tachtoinim. That's all the neshama wants to do.